mother-in-law was as good as her daughter, and sometimes even better. The day I married Laura, I thought I was marrying just her. It was a small ceremony tucked away in the gardens of her childhood home, with close friends and family surrounding us. The flowers were in full bloom, and the air carried the scent of roses, just as Laura had wanted. Her smile that day was radiant, as though nothing could dim the light she brought into my life. Little did I know that my marriage to Laura would also lead to an unexpectedly deep bond with someone else, her mother, Anne. Now, everyone has heard the dreaded stories of mother-in-laws. They meddle, they criticize, they make you feel like you'll never be good enough for their child. I had mentally prepared for that, having seen enough of those dynamics in my friends' lives. But Anne was different, and from the very first day, I knew it. Laura had warned me, playfully, about her mother. She's protective, but she means well. You'll see, she said, her eyes sparkling as she fastened her veil in the mirror. At the time, I thought it was just the usual pre-wedding jitters. I smiled and nodded, thinking that Anne would be like any other overbearing mother. I could handle it. When we exchanged our vows, I felt her presence, Anne standing just behind Laura, her hands gently clasped, eyes filled with unshed tears. She looked at her daughter with a love so profound, it was almost palpable. And then when she glanced at me, I saw something I hadn't expected: hope, trust, and the unmistakable look of someone handing over the most precious thing in their life. In those early months of marriage, life was a whirlwind. Laura and I moved into our first apartment, navigating the growing pains of sharing our lives under one roof. Work was demanding, and we had our share of small arguments: who would do the dishes, whose turn it was to take out the trash, but nothing major. Anne would check in every now and then, sending us homemade meals or inviting us over for Sunday dinners. Each time we visited, she greeted me with the warmth of someone who didn't see me as just her son-in-law, but as part of her family. One evening, after a particularly rough day at work, I found myself sitting on the porch of Laura's childhood home, having arrived early for one of those Sunday dinners. Laura was running late, stuck at a last-minute work meeting. Anne came out quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. She handed me one without a word, then sat beside me. "How are you really doing, James?" she asked, her voice soft but knowing. I hesitated for a moment. How could she know? It wasn't something I had even fully admitted to myself. That the stress of the job, the new responsibilities, and the pressure of being a good husband were weighing heavily on me. "I'm managing," I finally replied, though my voice lacked conviction. She looked at me with those gentle, perceptive eyes of hers. "You don't always have to manage, you know. It's okay to admit when you need help." Something in her tone made me want to open up. It wasn't the typical advice people gave. It wasn't loaded with expectations or judgment. It was understanding, pure and simple. And that evening, sitting under the fading light of the sun, I told Anne everything that had been bottled up inside me: the anxiety, the fear of not being enough for Laura, the exhaustion that came with trying to balance everything. Anne listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer solutions right away. When I finished, she placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch reassuring. "You're doing better than you think, James. Being a good husband doesn't mean you have to be perfect. It means showing up, even when things are hard, and you've always shown up for Laura." Her words brought a sense of peace I hadn't realized I needed. That night, I didn't just see Anne as my mother-in-law anymore. She became a confidant, someone who understood the intricacies of life and marriage better than I ever could at that point. And over time, I realized she wasn't just as good as her daughter. Sometimes, in the quiet wisdom she offered, she was even better. As the years went by, Anne became an anchor for Laura and me. We shared countless family dinners, holidays, and moments of laughter. She was always there, not intrusively, but in the background, like a steadying force we didn't always realize we needed. When Laura and I faced rough patches, arguments that seemed insurmountable, or challenges that tested our patience, it was Anne who quietly reminded us of the love that brought us together in the first place. One such time came when Laura and I had been trying to start a family. Months turned into years, and each failed attempt left us more heartbroken than the last. Laura distanced herself, retreating into a shell of grief, and I found myself helpless, unable to console her. We stopped communicating the way we used to, and the tension between us grew. One evening, after another disheartening doctor's appointment, Laura stayed in bed all day, barely saying a word. I didn't know how to reach her. In desperation, I called Anne, hoping she could do something I couldn't. She arrived within the hour, her face lined with concern. She went into our bedroom and closed the door, leaving me alone in the living room. I heard their muffled voices, soft sobs from Laura, and Anne's calming murmurs. They stayed in there for what felt like hours, and when they finally emerged, Laura's eyes were red, but There was a sense of calm about her. Anne gave me a small, understanding smile. Sometimes all we need is someone to remind us that it's okay to hurt, but it's also okay to hope, she said quietly. From that moment on, I realized that Anne was more than just Laura's mother. She was a pillar of strength for both of us. She didn't fix our problems, but she made them feel more bearable, more manageable. She never took sides, always offering wisdom that came from years of experience, never judging, always understanding. When we finally did have a child, a beautiful little girl named Emma, it was Anne who helped us through the sleepless nights, the anxious first time parent moments, and the overwhelming joy that came with holding our daughter for the first time. I watched as Anne rocked Emma to sleep one night, her face serene, and I realized just how lucky I was, not just to have married Laura and the love of my life, but to have gained Anne as well. She had been there through our darkest times and our brightest moments, always quietly supporting, never asking for anything in return. As Emma grew, she adored her grandmother. They would sit in the garden, Anne teaching her how to plant flowers, just as she had done with Laura years before. And I knew deep down that Emma would grow up with the same love and wisdom that Anne had gifted us. In a world where mother-in-laws are often painted as difficult or distant, Anne was the exception. She was more than I could have ever hoped for, and as time passed, I came to see her not just as Laura's mother, but as someone who had become a second mother to me. She was as good as her daughter in every way. And sometimes, in the quiet, steady way she carried us through life's storms, she was even better. If you enjoyed this video, then like this video and subscribe this channel for more videos.